Are you designing web or mobile applications but you find that you are having button creep in your designs or don't even know the correct size your button's supposed to have in the first place? Then this video is for you. We will go over these 7 mistakes and in the end you will design screens, buttons that look professional just like here. So let's check here. If we are actually designing a button for desktop, the size you want to have is actually at most 32 pixels in height. That is readable enough. You can go to 40 of course, but 32 pixels is the minimum I would want you to go. So never below actually 32. Now when it comes to mobile too, you want your button to be around at least 40 pixels. Here it is 32 pixels and you want it above the desktop, which is 32 pixels just like we said, because in mobile the user has to tap with their fingers and that is much less precise than actually using a mouse. So we want this to be at least 40. And you can go up to usually 60. Apple recommends you want to be around 44 to 48. So around here would actually be good. Now, sometimes when beginner designers actually go on to create buttons, they run into the first problem of actually picking the color. The color they pick, while might look good, it has too little contrast when it comes to the label in the button and the background color. This makes it very hard to read for the user and it becomes very harder to know what the button does if the person can't read it. So one of the examples I'm going to show right here is, let's say we have a screen like this, and to check if a button is too hard to read, we are going to use a plugin I like to call Able. So I'm going to create 2 frames and I'm going to press Command/ to find Able here. And I am going to copy the color of the button and the text label, and you are going to see it's actually failing here. We are on getting 2 out of let's say 20 and you want to be at 4.5 when it comes to picking the contrast. So one thing I would advise you to do is, instead of just trying to eyeball it and picking basically white label in a let's say a light color, you can actually pick the label color and match it to the background and then darken the label color itself. So we would go over like here. So while it would look still good, and I'm gonna match the new color here. So while basically the button still looks good, it is also much more readable. And now let's check the contrast again. And now we're at 6.37 and we fixed the problem. The final thing that will make a button harder to read is the actual text size of the label. So when we actually zoom into this button, and I'm going to zoom in here, you probably want to pick it above 12, maybe between 14 to 16 pixels. When it comes to mobile especially, and in desktop you want to pick between 14 to 16 as well. Let's get this down, but around here is the most readable size. 14 pixels also cuts it, but anything below you really don't want to do. The only exception case is when it comes to icons and the button navigation. You might get away with 10 to 12 pixels because the iconization also helps the user understand what the actions actually is going to be. Next problem you will have is you will need a different variation or variations of the same button so that you can decrease or increase its priority in the user's eyes. Let's look at this screen, and the main problem this screen has is that it has too many primary buttons, meaning when a user looks at this, they don't understand they should click tap the edit button here, or they should tap the make a payment, because they both carry the same visual importance. The solution for this is to actually create a secondary and tertiary element when it comes to buttons. So that would look like, basically, if I wanted secondary it would look like this, or if I wanted a tertiary it would look like this. And immediately the moment when we go to least important one, the action kind of becomes very easy in the user's eyes. Basically they are like, okay, my main goal without even thinking about it is to click or tap this make a payment button. That's my most important action I can take. Now you might ask me, Ahmed, what if I have more than 3 buttons and I only have 3 levels? How do I actually prioritize them? If you look here, this is basically just a question we talked about. We have more than basically 3 buttons here, but the screen still kind of can look a bit crowded if we would have more than 3 action items here. So the solution when it comes to this problem is you want to have the hide menu pattern where the final element can actually be a icon like the more info option. When the user clicks, a menu would open up with the other actions that are less important than add or details. So this lets you actually scale the solution of levels of the button much more from 3 to actually 5 to 7, because you can have 5 items more in the menu that is going to open up. Now, when it comes to actually designing for a production level, let's say project, one problem you would run into is communicating with devs will be hard if your buttons or other elements don't have states. Now, if we are looking at these 2 screens, let's say the first one is where the user successfully completes their make a payment by tapping here. But the second one is maybe they did not fill certain, let's say, options. Maybe their card wasn't there. When this happens, the make payment option should actually be disabled. And the way to create a disabled state, for example, is to get the opacity to 50%. And this will work 90% of the time. But there are other states you actually need to learn to create to actually successfully do this. And it will take a while to explain this in a single video, but if you click on the tutorial, I will actually show you step by step how to do this on Figma. Now, shadows. They are actually a very good visual design tool when it comes to making a button actual priority on a screen. But many designers actually make several mistakes. If we look at the screen, the beginner's mistake usually is they just will have too much shadow. Meaning the shadow we have right now is 50%, and that is already too much. And many beginners don't even have blur, so they look around, let's say, like this, where it is too much shadow that the attention of the user is actually going to the shadow instead of the button. So there are actually a couple of, what would you say, key thumbs, rules of thumbs or principles that will help you here. First, you want to have roughly 3 times blur to the amount of the Y coordinate you pick. So if I picked 4, the blur would be at 12. If I pick 6, it will be at 18. The second thing that matters is make the shadow in black with opacity between 15% to 25%, meaning here is the minimum, which is 15%, and if I get to 25, this is kind of the maximum. And this actually gives this elevated look, but it also doesn't basically take the user's eye attention from the button and move it to the shadow. Now, there's an exception to this rule, and that is when you are trying to basically add shadow to a button in a dark background. In this case, you want the shadow to be at least 50%. And you want the blur to be just the same, and now it looks up. Because if we implement our usual 15%, it doesn't look much because the shadow itself is black, but because the background is dark, the user doesn't register the shadow that we are using. So you want to have around 50% to even, you can go sometimes to 70. Now, the final mistake most beginner designers make is when they are trying to design buttons, they don't know how much border radius the button should have. A key principle in design is the more round an object is, the more friendly it is, and the less round an object is, the more serious and stylish it looks, and this is true especially when it comes to buttons. When you are actually working with a button, ask yourself if the application is friendly enough to actually have a higher border radius, like let's say here is 8. And if not, if it's too stylish, maybe it doesn't even need a border radius. Now, you also want to match the radius to the other elements you are using on the screen, like here, the pop-up here is roughly 4, so I would probably repeat this in the actual, if I was working on the screen, you know, for let's say a project. Now, here is an important part though. When it comes to the text label inside, you want the text labels left and right margins to be at least bigger or equal to the border radius of the button. So if I get the border radius to be 14, it looks kind of odd because the text label looks too close to the edges now. So what you want to have is, let's say if the border radius is, let's say is around 14, you want to have at least 14 pixels left and right side for the button's label to work. And if let's say the maximum you would have is 22, so that it becomes actually circular, then you want to have at least 22 pixels left and right. This makes sure that the text label doesn't actually look too closed in, and it actually makes it a lot easier to read as well. Hey guys, if you love this video and now understand how to design great UI looking buttons, and you want to learn more advanced UI design tricks, watch this video next, you will love it.